All across the eastern United States, there are thousands of ancient mounds. Giant earthworks, some older than the pyramids, shaped like animals, like pyramids, like vast rings and squares. For most of American history, schoolbooks taught that a mysterious lost race built them, a vanished, advanced people, wiped out long ago. Anyone but the Native Americans living right beside them. It was a comforting story. It was also a lie. And that lie was used to help justify the taking of a continent. The strangest part is that the truth was never hidden. The mounds were in plain sight, all over the country, by the tens of thousands. People farmed around them, built tents next to them, plowed through them. And still, for generations, the country told itself that the obvious builders, the native peoples whose ancestors had lived on this land for thousands of years, could not possibly have made them. To understand how strange that is, you first have to see what the mounds really are. Start with the scale. These earthworks stretch from the Great Lakes down to the Gulf, across the Ohio and Mississippi valleys and beyond. There is the great city of Cahokia, with its pyramid larger at the base than the one at Giza. There is Serpent Mound in Ohio, a quarter-mile-long snake of earth, coiling across a ridge. There are the Newark earthworks, also in Ohio, enormous geometric figures, circles and octagons so large that whole crowds could gather inside them, and so precisely built that they line up with the cycles of the moon. These were not random heaps of dirt. The geometric earthworks show careful planning, standard units of measurement, and astronomy. The effigy mounds show artistry. The city mounds show organization on a massive scale. Whoever built them understood engineering, mathematics, and the sky. They moved millions of baskets of earth and shaped the land into monuments that have lasted thousands of years. This is one of the great building traditions of the ancient world, and it sits right here in the middle of North America. Now hold that picture, because here comes the betrayal. When European settlers and their descendants spread across this land and saw these works, many simply refused to believe that the native peoples had built them. Instead, they invented a story. There must have been, they said, an earlier race, a lost, civilized, vanished people, the true mound builders, who had raised these wonders and then disappeared. And who was this lost race supposed to be? The theories ran wild. Some said it was a lost white race. Some said the lost tribes of Israel. Some said Vikings, or Phoenicians, or refugees from sunken Atlantis, or the Toltecs of Mexico. The one thing all these theories had in common was the conclusion they protected. The mounds, they insisted, were the work of anyone except the ancestors of the Native Americans living right there. If you are wondering why anyone would cling so hard to such an obvious falsehood, that is exactly the right question, and the answer is the dark heart of this story. The myth was not just an honest mistake. It was useful. Think about what it did. If a noble, advanced, civilized race had built these mounds, and had then been wiped out by the ancestors of the very native peoples now living on the land, then two convenient ideas followed. First, the native peoples were not the original owners of this country. They were latecomers, conquerors who had destroyed someone better. And second, if native peoples had once destroyed a great civilization, then pushing them off their land was not a crime. It was almost justice. The myth turned theft into payback. That is how a story about old dirt mounds became a weapon. In the same decades when the United States was forcing native nations off their lands, marching them west on roads of suffering, the mound builder myth was there in the background, whispering that the land had never really been theirs to begin with. It eased the national conscience. It made the taking feel righteous. If a myth busted with hard evidence is the kind of story you came here for, take a moment now and subscribe to Bedrock. We are here to give the continent its real history back, the one that was buried on purpose. And stay close, because the man who finally broke this lie started out believing it himself. Not everyone fell for the myth. Long before it was settled, Thomas Jefferson, of all people, got it right. Back in the 1780s, Jefferson carefully dug a trench into a burial mound on his own land in Virginia, studied the layers, and concluded that it had been built by the ancestors of Native Americans. It was one of the first scientific excavations in American history, and it pointed straight at the truth. But the convenient lie was stronger than the careful evidence, and for the next 100 years, the myth won. The lie finally met its match near the end of the 19th century. The Smithsonian Institution, through its Bureau of Ethnology, decided to settle the mound builder question once and for all. They put a man named Cyrus Thomas in charge of the investigation, and here is the honest, powerful part. When Thomas began, he leaned toward the lost race idea himself. He expected the evidence to point to a vanished people. He was, at the start, something of a believer. So Thomas and his team did the work. They surveyed and excavated thousands of mounds across the eastern United States. They dug through the earth, layer by layer, and they let the evidence speak. They compared the artifacts, the burial styles, the construction methods, and the evidence pointed, again and again, in one direction. The mounds were not built by some lost foreign race. They were built by the ancestors of the native peoples, still living in the same regions. In 1894, Cyrus Thomas published his findings in a massive report, more than 700 pages long. His conclusion was blunt. There was, he wrote, an unbroken chain connecting the mound builders and the historical Indians. The lost race had never existed. The builders had been here all along. The man who set out half expecting to confirm the myth ended up demolishing it because he followed the evidence instead of the story he wanted. That report is often called the birth of American archaeology. By replacing a comforting myth with careful science, it put the study of the American past on solid ground. And it did something simple and just. It gave the credit back to the people who had earned it. The ancestors of Native Americans built the mounds, all of them. The pyramids of Cahokia, the Serpent in Ohio, the great geometric earthworks, the thousands of others, native hands, native minds, native achievement. You would think that would be the end of it. But myths like this one do not die easily because they were never really about evidence. Even today, more than a century after Cyrus Thomas, you can still find the old lie in new costumes. There are people who insist that giants built the mounds, or that aliens did, or some lost advanced civilization, anything to avoid the plain and proven answer. The persistence is the tell. When people will believe in giants and aliens before they will believe in native engineers. The problem was never a lack of evidence. It was a refusal to give credit. And that is what makes this more than an old academic debate. The mound builder myth was a second kind of theft. The first theft was the land. The second was the authorship. It was not enough to take the continent. The story also took away the credit for the continent's greatest ancient works and handed it to a race that never existed. To deny that native peoples built the mounds was to deny their history, their genius, and their deep belonging to this place. So, the work of setting it right matters. Every time the true story is told, a little of that stolen authorship comes back. The Newark earthworks have now been recognized by the wider world as a treasure of human achievement, built by native peoples. Cahokia is honored as the great city it was. The record slowly is being corrected. The names are being put back. To see how absurd the myth was, look closer at what these earthworks could do. The Newark earthworks in Ohio include a giant octagon joined to a circle, built so precisely that they capture the full cycle of the moon's risings and settings, a pattern that takes more than 18 years to complete. To lay that out in Earth, the builders had to track the moon for decades and encode what they learned into the ground. That is advanced astronomy, and it was supposedly beyond the people whose ancestors actually did it. Or look at Serpent Mound, a quarter-mile snake of earth winding along a ridge in Ohio, its head aligned with the setting sun at midsummer. It is one of the largest effigy mounds in the world, a work of art and meaning on a giant scale. Standing before it, the idea that its builders were incapable savages collapses on sight. Yet that is exactly what the myth insisted. The myth did not just sit in dusty books. It shaped how the country treated the mounds themselves. As American towns spread, countless mounds were plowed flat for farmland, or dug apart for fill dirt, the city of St. Louis once held so many mounds that it was nicknamed Mound City, and then nearly all of them were destroyed as the city grew. People felt free to bulldoze the works, precisely because they did not believe the local native peoples had made them. The lie licensed as the destruction, and the myth was spread by powerful voices. Popular books told dramatic tales of the vanished mound builder race. showmen and writers spun stories of lost white civilizations and ancient battles. The idea worked its way deep into the popular imagination of the 19th century, repeated so often that it felt like common knowledge. The truth, that native ancestors built the mounds, was the quiet, unglamorous fact that kept getting drowned out. Underneath it all ran the politics. This was the age of westward expansion and Indian removal, when the United States was taking native land on a massive scale. A story that painted native peoples as latecomers and destroyers of a nobler race was extremely convenient. It softened the conscience of a nation in the middle of a vast taking. Bad history and bad policy fed each other. That is why the work of Cyrus Thomas was about more than archaeology. When the Smithsonian set him loose on the question, he did it properly. His team surveyed and dug into mound after mound across the eastern United States, gathering hard physical evidence rather than trading in legends. They traced the styles, the methods, and the artifacts and matched them to known native cultures. The pattern was overwhelming and consistent. His 700-page report in 1894 left little room for argument. The mound builders and the historical native nations were one continuous people, no lost race, no vanished foreigners, just these ancestors of the indigenous Americans who had been there the entire time. With evidence stacked that high, the scholarly myth finally broke. But notice how long it took and how late it came. The truth was not formally settled until the very end of the 19th century, long after the myth had done its work of justifying removal and destruction. By the time the record was corrected, much of the damage, to the mounds and to the people, had already been done. Setting the facts straight could not undo the losses the lie had helped enable, and even now, the old lie will not fully die. Pick up a fringe documentary or scroll through certain corners of the internet, and you will still find people insisting that giants, or a lost super race, or visitors from the stars built the mounds. The names change. The function stays the same. It is still at bottom a refusal to credit native peoples with their own achievements. The evidence has been clear. For over a century, the resistance was never really about evidence. That is the lesson buried in this story. A myth does not survive because it is true. It survives because it is useful, and because giving it up means admitting something uncomfortable. The mound builder myth lasted as long as it did because it flattered a nation and excused a conquest. The truth was simpler, and it was standing in plain view the whole time. The mounds were never built by a vanished lost race. They were built by the ancestors of the people who were standing right there the whole time. The people America was busy pushing off the land. Even as it stared at their monuments and refused to believe, the continent had a story long before it had a name, and for 100 years that story was stolen twice. We are here to give it back. If you want to keep setting the record straight with me, Bedrock is just getting started. I will see you in the next one.